So the topics we discuss in today's presentation will range from kind of the underlying concepts around motivation to how we can apply these concepts in practice. We have two guest presenters from OCHIN, Sarah Wachs and Brad Archer, and they will present on how they've motivated their staff to look at data and work towards improvement. So one of the big focus of the call today is how we can not just engage people in quality improvement, but engage them to use data within those improvement efforts. And then again, the presentation slides and recording will be available for download on our website. The objectives for today's call are, one, we hope that you walk away with a better understanding of the key elements of motivation, as well as the impact of having motivated staff. Also, we hope that you learn a little bit more about some systems and best practices that you can use to increase motivation in your clinic. And we hope that you learn how to communicate and share data in a way that can be used to help staff kind of see beyond the numbers and use data to actually improve outcome rather than just looking at it. All right, so what is motivation? I think we all innately kind of understand how this is defined, but in one of the articles that I was reading as I was looking into this presentation, it's called Increasing Motivation of Healthcare Workers, and the author talks about motivation is really about getting your employees to be motivated to do something. And he talks about this kind of with two underlying concepts. So there's one that highly motivated individuals can more easily overcome obstacles, such as difficult working conditions or technical issues or inadequate equipment. And then the other concept is that helping workers become as productive as possible in the face of these obstacles is an important outcome of having motivated staff. And so to deepen this definition, the Merriam-Webster dictionary talks about it not just as getting people to do something, but giving staff or people a reason for doing something. So in other words, what compels them to actually change something and take action? So that's just kind of the definition we want to think about as we're going through this presentation today. There's also a difference between employee motivation and employee job satisfaction. So in that same article, the author kind of highlights these differences. So when you're looking at the image on this slide, look at it as if it was, from a horizontal standpoint. So in other words, if you look at it, if the management takes, specific action and creates incentive systems within their clinic, then the internal state or the feelings that employees will feel will be a sense of motivation, which will result in improved performance. Whereas, if the management creates a dynamic and healthy workplace environment, employees are more likely to feel job satisfaction, which will increase retention in the workplace. So I think the key takeaway is that motivation is linked to improved performance in the workplace, whereas job satisfaction is linked to improved retention in the workplace. Just to put this in perspective a little bit, think about the term CCO incentive metric and what that means to you. I mean, this is a term we're all familiar with, and I'm sure it resonates differently with different people. But essentially, this is a system that's set up by the CCOs to increase motivation among healthcare providers to deliver improved care. And I would venture to say that hopefully it motivates the people in the healthcare systems, especially because, especially where funding is limited, because the better you do on these metrics that the CCOs are incentivizing, the more money you're going to get. So just kind of a way to think about incentive systems. And I'd like to also kind of route this concept how it relates to our clinics. So in today's healthcare environment, as you all know, the FQHCs and other providers and healthcare systems are always being assessed on how they're improving quality of care, how they're improving on key metrics like the CCO incentive metrics. So in a recent survey that we conducted here at OPCA by the data team, 37 out of 50 respondents indicated that their clinic is overwhelmed with too many measures to track and improve. And so that equates to 74% of SQHC respondents that felt pressure and feelings of being overwhelmed by all the measures that they're accountable for. So if you put the motivational concepts and this data results from together, and it's easy to see how important this concept becomes. In other words, you want to make sure that your employees are motivated to improve on metrics that you're being held accountable for. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that they understand the compelling reason as to why they should improve, rather than just telling them these are things that we have to improve on for the CCO or for the state. So just a few elements of motivation to think about. Often we judge motivation by witness behaviors or external symptoms, but really it goes deeper than that. So motivation is really an internal perception among individuals. And these three internal elements are listed on the slide. So you can see that one is valence, and this is how we perceive, how important do we perceive this work to be. Then there's self-efficacy, which is our perceived chances of succeeding. So if there's a specific metric, how much do we think we actually are able to succeed in improving that metric? And then there's expectancy, and that's our expectation of some kind of personal gain or reward. With the expectancy piece, not all incentive systems, for example, are monetary, but setting up something that allows people to gain a sense that they're expected to do something and that they can expect some sort of return for their work is a good way to start getting staff to be motivated. Another thing to keep in mind with these three elements is that you want to make sure how you utilize these three elements will vary depending on your audience, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but just something to think about, that each individual might see these three elements in a different way. So I want to pause here real quickly and give some time for a group discussion. So we just talked about the elements of motivation, the definition of motivation, difference between motivation and job satisfaction. So when thinking about people you work with, which ones are highly motivated and how do you know? And the second question that you can answer is, think about a time when you were motivated. Why was that, and what motivated you? So feel free to answer one or both questions and just chime in if you have something to share.
So, this is Erin from Siskiyou, and it seems like we've done a few incentive kind of rewards, but the feedback we get from the MAs who are being incentivized was more like, thanks for the feedback on how we're doing our jobs. We want to do a good job because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm going to get a prize or recognition. So it seems to me that a lot of the truly highly motivated people are motivated intrinsically. And, and I don't know how to balance, when you're trying to come up with a program to incentivize a group of people, how do you sort of light up the people who need that external factor without demotivating the internally motivated?
Question. Yeah, totally. And I think you're right. There are people that just are intrinsically motivated. But I think going back to the definition of motivation, I think that may come from that they have a compelling reason, and their reason could be a personal reason, that they just value improving something. But I think the idea is, what is that reason for people? And I think that can change depending on the individual.
I think Erin's question is a good one, which is, really what is the expectation in a job, and then also what's really going above and beyond. And as organizations, that can be often really difficult to delineate or call out. So thinking about it, maybe it's also an opportunity for discussion, like to come up with a vision within all the positions of really what is going above and beyond your job in terms of description of what you're supposed to do versus something that's more, well, like I said, above and beyond, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And so it looks like Vicki Hudson from Coastal Family Health chimed in, and she said, for us, it is the ones who are validated in the work that they do that seem to be most motivated. And so I guess as a follow-up to that, how do you know that they're motivated? Are they demonstrating behaviors? Or is it just because they are going above and beyond? Is it because they're, they're doing particular things in their work? How do you know people are motivated? Is there anything that you guys feel you demonstrate when you're motivated to do something? Like kind of feelings that come up, or?
This is Claire at OPCA. I think enthusiasm, sort of seeing people get really excited about a subject or something they're working on, or the way they're doing something, is a good indicator to me of someone's kind of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I call someone out? Is Tyler on the phone? Are you unmuted, Tyler?
Yeah, this is Tyler.
You seem excited.
You're called out.
Tyler, I'm just curious. Just because I know you've been at Mosaic for a while, and I know you do some really great work. Is it okay for me to ask you personally, if you're willing to share, and feel free to say no, what motivates you to do your job really well?
I think what motivates me is that, I have a lot of data at my disposal to help others out. And so being able to provide that information to others in the organization to help improve, different objectives or see how programs are going. That's one source of motivation for me, is being able to have, numbers that help support things that we're doing within the organization.
Thanks for sharing. So, awesome. You're tied to what you do because you see value with it. And then also, it sounds like you're in an environment that supports you to do your job well.
That's certainly true.
Thank you. Sorry to call you out, but thanks.
And so I'm just going to go back a couple slides, to this 3 elements. And so there's our perceived importance of work, there's our perceived chances of success, and then there's our expectation of a gain or reward. And so, I would say for me that just from in my role, I think everybody here at OPCA has a high perception that this work is important. And I fall in that category. For me and the work that I do, I find that I'm successful when I see people learning things and when I see them taking away items that, tools and using them in their clinics that were presented to them. And so for me, that gives me some self-efficacy that, the work that I produce will be used and people will learn from it. And then again, the expectancy piece, for me, it's not a financial reward. That reward comes just from knowing that I helped somebody out. So I guess I want to be clear that the expectancy and incentive systems don't necessarily have to be monetary. It's really speaking to whatever value that the individual has. Does anyone else have any stories or thoughts and questions? Okay. If you think of anything as we move on, feel free to type it in the chat box. But thanks for the conversation. So now I kind of want to move into some of the systems that you can use to increase motivation, specifically around not just motivation to improve, but motivation to use data to improve. So there's a couple different frameworks I'll discuss. The first one is called the So What test, and this is a pretty simple test. Sometimes when you ask employees to look at data or to make an improvement on something, they either think or ask out loud, so what? What's the purpose? What's in it for me? Why do we need to do this? So sometimes often just telling someone that it's important to improve doesn't actually give employees a sense that they should be compelled to look at data and make the improvements. The So What test is particularly useful for metric boards or dashboards. So metric boards, of course, should be relevant to the team member, but it should also act as a way to communicate performance levels to staff and describe kind of the purpose of why you're looking at that data. Some things to think about or that you could not just talk about how the metric is important, but discuss how it aligns with business objectives, and this may increase someone's perception of how important the work is. You can also talk about maybe how the team performance is trending, or discussion of ways to improve on a particular metric, and that might give people a sense of self-efficacy in that they know kind of where they're headed and what the options are. You might also think about talking or having on the metric board how the team is or is not currently meeting clinic or patient requirements, and what will actually happen if they don't meet those requirements, or likewise if they do meet those requirements. And that just sets up some expectations among the staff. And so the reasoning behind the So What test and using this in conjunction with the performance metric board is that if performance metrics are not transparent, staff are more likely to become disengaged and less motivated to improve. So you really want to make sure that whatever measures you're looking at the clinic are transparent and understood by all staff. So to build on this a little bit, there's something called the opt-in framework. And this was taken from a workbook, which you will find on the references slide. It's called Making Data Talk. And it really highlights kind of a linear step-by-step fashion that you can work towards meeting this So What test. So the first step in this is to organize. And really what this means is that the leadership or whoever is proposing a particular metric needs to get a clear understanding of the intention of looking at this data. So do they want to just track it over time and see how it's trending? Are you actually looking at this data for improvements? What intention do you have within this? And then once that's clearly defined and everyone's on consensus, then you create a plan for communicating that to staff. So within the plan, you obviously need a purpose or a compelling reason that this metric should be looked at. You want to look at also in communication the context in which the team is operating. So maybe the team is very overwhelmed right now, or maybe they just had a big success. So you kind of just want to think about what the team is going through and what they're operating under, and that might help shed some light on how you'll communicate to them. And then you want to, in the same step, you want to plan a strategy for communication. And this is where you kind of look at your different audiences and what values they have, which I'll get in on the next slide. But you just want to make sure that whatever strategy you use is appropriate and that you'll reach a wide variety of audiences. So once you have an intention and a plan for communication, then it's good. This framework suggests that it's good to test the plan. So there's a few ways to do that. You may want to try the communication strategy with a group of individuals and get their feedback, whether it's through a survey or an interview. Or you might want to try the communication plan with one team, thinking about the concept of PDSA, just try it with one team and observe how they operate and see, observe how well the definitions and purpose and intention of this metric are understood. And that way you can kind of get feedback from them before you roll out the communication to other teams or the whole organization. And And then finally, once you have all that in place and you have a success within a test, then you just integrate that into your daily messages. And so, in other words, if a specific metric is chosen, you want to coordinate all, the efforts across individuals and teams who all may be equally affected by this metric, and just make sure that everyone is on the same page as far as the intention and purpose for looking at this data. So going back to that plan section of the opt-in framework, this section is really about knowing your audience, and you want to make sure that you deliver whatever message in a way that speaks to their values. So I think one of the big things here is that sometimes when we communicate based on what we think they want to know or what's important to us, but you really want to look at the people that you're speaking to and see what will influence them to change. So essentially there are three different types, quote unquote, of people. There are logical types, and these people are influenced heavily by data, evidence, and logical reasoning. Then others fall into the more formal type, and these people are largely influenced by leadership. So in other words, they typically won't get on board unless leadership endorses a specific improvement or something is written as a policy or on paper. And then there's the third group, and I think the majority of people fall into this category according to the research, and that's the category of emotional, where they tend to be influenced when connections are made to their heart. So when thinking about all the staff that you work with, it's important to consider which category each team member falls into. That way you can develop a communication strategy that's either heavily data-based, evidence-based, possibly a strategy that's based on a policy or procedure that's upper management's asked for, or based on a story of how this improvement will help the greater good. And it's possible that you might need to kind of combine all of that depending on your team and create a strategy that is a mixture of all those components. So, aside from the test portion of the opt-in framework, and that's really where you look at is your communication strategy effective, there are some kind of best practices or things to keep in mind for effective communication. And one is that good stories are driven by business problem or objectives. The second idea is that effective communication presents data and findings in terms that the audience can understand. And the third one, which kind of goes back to the last slide, is keeping in mind what's interesting to the audience. So making sure that your communication speaks to their values and what they find important and interesting. And then the last one towards effective communication is kind of concluding with some actions. That way team members know what the next steps are in regards to this particular performance measure, maybe where they need to go and where they're currently at, so they can have some kind of deciding factor on what those next steps are. So a good example of this is the FICO credit score, which is kind of unrelated to healthcare, but I thought it was something worth sharing. This credit score has been an effective communication effort within our society and has been widely adopted among consumers and lenders and banks and various institutions. And I think the reason for that is a few things. So first, a FICO credit score is heavily valence driven. So there's a heavy, there's a strong thought and idea among everybody that we need to have good credit in order to buy a car, take out a home mortgage, open a credit card, and that's how we're perceiving the importance of it. We need this credit in order to be able to do certain things in society. The score is also set up in a 3-digit, easy-to-understand number, and that's helpful for both consumers. That way they can easily see where they kind of fit onto the scale and maybe where they need to improve. And it's also helpful for lenders because then they can kind of assess the risk that they would be taking in lending consumer money. And so, again, just a quick example, but given that every lender in the country or every bank kind of uses a score to determine risk, the FICO credit score is a good example of using data to create action. So again, in other words, if you want to do something in today's society, consumers know that they have to take actions that will help them establish some credit. And so the communication structure should essentially answer 6 questions. And again, answers to these questions may need to be adapted depending on your audience. But you want to make sure that you address what is the problem, what is the impact of this problem on our clinic, how will we measure the impact, so this is where the data piece comes in. What is the available data? Do we know our baseline? Do we still need to do a little bit of research on that? The 5th question is, what is the initial solution hypothesis? And all this means is that it's important to talk about things that maybe have been tried and succeeded or have been tried and failed. That way you can give some context to the effort. And then if you have it, you'll want to make sure that you conclude with a solution, and that way people kind of know their next steps. And before I hand it over to our guest presenters, I just want to quickly touch on sharing data and reroute to the metric boards and dashboards concept. So there's tons of research and information out there how to build a good dashboard, and I won't go into all of that because that's essentially a webinar in itself. But just a few things I want to point out. That one, your dashboard should be centered around the needs of the group. So you want to make sure that whatever your metric board says is meaningful to the team members and helps address questions and concerns that they have and information that they need in order to improve on a specific metric. You want to be sure to include the purpose, so the reason why this is important and why they should look at it, any implications for meeting or not meeting a specific target. Another thing that's helpful is the current and target values, and that's just so people know how they're currently performing and where they need to be. And then it's helpful to identify an owner. That way, if any team member has any questions or concerns, they have a direct point of contact that they can go speak with. And finally, you want to make sure that your metric board passes the so what test. So is this meaningful? Do people understand the data? Do they understand why the data is important? So those are all things that you need to make sure your dashboard addresses. So I will hand it over to Sarah Wachs and Brad Archer. Sarah Wachs is the Director of Operational Excellence at OCHIN, and her colleague Brad Archer is the Quality Improvement Advisor at OCHIN. And they'll be presenting some examples of how they've applied these concepts in practice and used data to motivate staff.
Thanks, Akira, and hello, everybody. Can you hear us okay?
Yep.
All right, great. We're excited to be here and have a few slides and a few stories to share with you. So I'll turn it over to Brad to get us started.
Very good, thanks. So when we think about motivating the staff within OCHIN, yeah, you can go ahead and move to the next slide.
Thank you.
We really start with the purpose activity, and we use quality as a business strategy within OCHIN to define our leadership system. And one of the key activities is the purpose activity. That's kind of the starting point. And so from a motivation standpoint, what we really are attempting to do is establish a constancy of purpose, and that's all wrapped around this purpose document that we've developed and published internally. It's also available externally, so we do share this and use this with our stakeholders as well. And we use this for the purpose of aligning our mission, goals, objectives, governance, how we interact with our OCHIN members, which is a collaborative of various safety net organizations throughout the United States. And the purpose of this is to really provide the reason. So Akira talked about the reason before and what motivation's about. So this kind of sets that stage. It provides the reason for the work that they're doing and also helps them understand how the work aligns with our members, right? And what's important to our members who essentially are our customers. So that's basically where it starts. And from an OCHIN perspective, this is one of the first things that a new employee is onboarded with, right? So it's a multi-page document. I don't know, it must be like 8 or 10 pages, right? And covers obviously our mission and how we are engaged in the things that we strive to be as an organization. So that's kind of the starting point. And then from there, if you can advance the next slide.
Oops. There we go.
Good, good, good. We use a series of what we call system maps, or another name is linkages of processes, right? And the purpose of this tool is to visually describe the key processes in terms of driver processes at the top, the mainstay processes in the middle, which is primarily what the organization does in service of the customer, right? So these are the key processes that are associated with transforming a product or service and delivering it to the customer. And then at the bottom, we also have support processes. So this is a visual tool that helps us provide this type of information to stakeholders, employees, on how the processes are linked together, how they're interdependent, and we use this at various levels. So this is a family of system maps or linkages of processes that are at various levels, all the way from a conceptual view to a micro level view, or process maps, if you will. And depending on the need of the team or the work that they're doing individually, determines on which version of this they may or may not be working with. So again, the main purpose is to provide an overview, a visual overview of the linkages and how the processes are interdependent. And it's really based on the need and what levels we're going to work with. Now, these are living documents, right? So the system is constantly changing. As we improve processes, as we develop new products and services, so we're continuously updating these documents and communicating with the staff, and this helps serve purpose of planning, right, within an organization as well. So that's another key tool that we use, and as we work down through this, part of the purpose on the next slide, the purpose document outlines what OCHIN's core competencies are. And there's actually 5 core competencies that OCHIN has here, and we start with leadership and workforce development. We have high-value patient-centered solutions, knowledge generation dissemination, high-touch service, and then kind of the foundation for all of that is at the bottom, which is the financial independence and corporate compliance. And the purpose document goes into detail describing each one of these core competencies from a customer perspective and what OCHIN delivers and what we aspire to be in the next 3 to 5 years around these core competencies. The interesting thing about this is we use it from a planning perspective. So this is an input to our strategic planning process, and we've established strategic initiatives associated with each and every one of these core competencies. So all improvement initiatives, all of our key metrics, are, as well as the system map, are aligned to these core competencies and or strategic initiatives that OCHIN works on throughout the year, and from a planning cycle standpoint annually, as we identify areas of opportunity and where we need to continue to improve as an organization, or if we even need to add something new in the way of a product and service or a core competency. And then moving on to the next slide, how we're breaking this down from a data standpoint, and this is all information, right? So although you haven't seen specifically the data in the way of graphs or dashboards at this point, this is still how we're communicating using data. We use driver diagrams to outline each and every one of our strategic initiatives. Each one of these has a sponsor as well as a champion, and through that process, the team will then identify what the primary drivers are, secondary and tertiary drivers, and what initiatives we will be working on throughout the year. And that then directly feeds into the next slide, which defines what our strategic initiative family measures are, right? So for each one of these strategic initiatives, we have identified a small set of family measures, right? Coming back to the slide that you had posted earlier with regards to the number of metrics. Too many metrics, right? What do we focus on? There's too much. We're overwhelmed. So we try to keep it short and simple here, and anywhere between 5 and 6 key metrics or family measures that we're going to use to measure and monitor progress in these strategic initiatives. Okay, so what do we do with this, right? So the next slide talks a little bit about how we're using data for accountability and improvement. And we have a monthly reporting, right? We analyze data and we theme comments. So there are various ways that we're collecting data from a system perspective, but also we reach out to our members and ask for their feedback on a routine basis with regards to overall satisfaction, things that we can do to improve. And we summarize all that data and create reports, and then that's distributed to the management team, and they use that then to cascade down and communicate with their teams and organizations. We also have an operation team and management forum meetings on a biweekly basis, where these measures for the strategic initiatives are reviewed and discussed, actions identified, and what are we going to do when performance doesn't meet prediction, right? So prediction's key here. We use the model for improvement and PDSA cycles, and we certainly use data over time with regards to our family of measures. So we're always looking at performance and whether or not we can predict what that might look like in the future, and when it doesn't, then we'll assign actions if needed. We also use this as an input to our strategic planning process, and this helps inform what the strategic initiatives and plan are going to be for the next year, and ultimately for the next 3 to 5 years as we look out further than that. And as we mentioned, the strategic initiatives use these family measures to monitor performance as well as the improvement efforts that are underway. So as we initiate a new improvement effort, there's a family of measures associated with that, and we'll bring those on board and monitor those for the purpose of improvement, which may be a little bit different than a high-level organizational use of a measure, right? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who will continue our story.
Yes, thank you, Brad. So Brad gave you really all of what Brad talked about is the underlying framework that informs everything that I'm going to talk about coming up. So Akira, if you could move to the next slide for me, please. So we talk about this data in a variety of ways, and I'll share some of what those are, and then I'll tell a couple stories. Excuse me. So we regularly summarize and share the data from these family of measures and with regards to these strategic initiatives at our all-employee huddles, which happen every Monday morning, and at our all-staff meetings, which are about 3 times a year, and we actually just had one last week. So we've had a lot of data floating through here, and folks are talking about it lately. So this is where we summarize and share with the entire staff what's going on with regards to these strategic initiatives and how we're impacting the data. We really try in these communications to tell the story from the member and customer perspective, so really linking that work we do to our customers. And this is also an opportunity to not just bring folks on board and align them with what we're doing, but also to celebrate our successes. What are we doing well? And then conversely, it doesn't say it on the slide, but what could we be doing still even better? This is also, all of this is also aligned to our performance management system. So each employee's goals per quarter and per year should, theoretically, if we're doing our job right as managers, roll up to these strategic initiatives so that each person knows how the work they're doing impacts these strategic initiatives, impacts our customers, and really it's why we're doing this work. So I think that really heavily ties back into the motivation elements that Akira was talking about. And we review these regularly during the quarterly check-ins. So Akira, there's one more click on this slide. So but what does this mean? So this is what I'm going to talk about next. So we've talked about the framework, we've talked about how we communicate, but what does this mean to the people we're actually trying to motivate? In the next couple of slides, we've got a handful of animations, so please bear with me and with Akira as we get through them. So here's the first story I'm going to tell you. This is called the Better Service Initiative, and this is directly aligned with the high-touch service core competency that was on that house graphic that Brad showed, and this was and is ongoing OCHIN's attempts to improve our customer service, both internally and externally to our members, to our customers. So Akira, if you could give one more click. Thank you. So here's the data that we started with. So this is, I'm not going to go into the details of what this data means, but this is a little bit of a dashboard that draws directly on the family of measures that Brad showed you for our high-touch service core competency or strategic initiative. And really what it's showing is we look at data over time, and then we've also got on those two graphs on the right some comments that have been themed. So this is really sort of our baseline. What do we know? What data do we have in regards to how we're doing for customer service? So this is something that we looked at in several different venues. We knew there was something we needed to do about it, and we decided to dig a little deeper. So next click. So the next thing, this might look a little bit like we're all crazy people over here, but for those of you who are familiar with it, this is a value stream map, and there were two reasons we did this. So what this is showing you, for those who aren't familiar with value stream maps, it's a map that shows a request for a product or service and then shows the delivery of that product or service. And all of those red storm clouds or bursts are issues, or you can also view them as areas for opportunity. So this is where we think we can do even better, or thought we could at the time. So the first reason for doing a value stream map was to dig a little bit deeper into the data and say, okay, where can we change? What are some of our ideas for change? What are some of the opportunities for change? But the second reason for doing it was really that motivation piece. What we did was we got the folks who head up the teams that really impact customer service the most. We got them all into a room, we got some subject matter experts from their team, and we got them brainstorming. So we got them to list out what their challenges are, and then we gave them an opportunity to say, how can we fix some of these problems? How can we address some of these challenges? So the motivation piece was really strong here. And I also want to point out that although you don't see numbers on this value stream map, this is also a form of data. So this is a little bit of qualitative data, all those storm clouds that you see there. So out of this came several things, but the one I want to share with you is next click, please. We decided to pilot a help desk JIRA customer service audit tool. And for those of you who don't know, OCHIN JIRA is our help desk ticketing system. And this is something that we've piloted with one team so far. And what it looks at is, for all of the help desk tickets out there, are they following some basic customer service standards? And on the audit, those standards are outlined, and there's a numeric value that can be assigned to them. And the way we do this is we've got a customer service coach who sits with each member of our help desk on a regular basis and goes through this with them and sort of marks out what they've done and looks at some of their existing JIRAs. We were real nervous to roll this out. We thought this might not be received well, but we thought, it's really worth a try based on the feedback that we had from that value stream mapping session, based on the engagement and the buy-in from the folks who do this work. Turns out they were right. So the results we've gotten and the feedback we've heard is that the folks on the help desk really love this process for two reasons. One, it gives them data. And two, it helps them understand exactly what they need to do in order to move those numbers. So that's really tying back to the using data for improvement. It's not just those run charts at the top, but it's also, here's data for you, and here's what you can do about that data. And so the next click on this one, this actually just came out last week, so I'm very excited about the timing. So here's the customer service coach that I mentioned. This was his communication back to the team we're piloting this with, and showing them that, listen, the numbers are moving, and great work. So that's I think, a direct correlation. It really It really ties back to the individual motivation, the giving them the reason to do something, as Akira mentioned earlier, the with them or the what's in it for me. This is really a direct tie back to individuals. So that's our first story, and I know we're kind of low on time, so I'm going to go kind of quick through the second story. So Akira, next slide, please. So this is the story of leadership and workforce development, and this is another one of our core competencies. And so this one is a little bit different because this one, we don't have any great data just yet in how we've changed behavior at the staff level, but this one's really about changing behavior at the management and organizational level. So first click, please. So first, this one starts with an employee engagement survey. So this is something that we did once some time ago across all staff, and then we do regular what we call pulse surveys to kind of collect ongoing how things are changing. So we've got employee engagement survey data. It's pretty robust. And this was another case of, okay, well, what do we do with this? And so we had a series of conversations with a variety of stakeholders. And next click, please. What we ended up with is 2 areas to focus in. The first one was management communication, and the second one was employee development. And so we're doing a handful of things here. Really, we're looking at how management communicates throughout the organization. And there's a couple of behavior changes we want to see. One area is that we're asking managers to be aware of how they're communicating on an individual level. And the second area is we're really trying to put structure into place so that we can give them some tools to communicate in a new or different way across the organization. But whatever it is that we end up doing, and you can tell we're sort of in the middle of this, we will be tying it back to that data and tying it back to that employee engagement survey. So hopefully we can see those numbers moving, and that becomes motivation to change even further in a different way. In regards to the employee development, we're putting together what we're calling an OCHIN Learning Institute, and that's next click, please. And this is brand new, or actually it's not even new yet, it's still in the planning phase. But this is where we are looking at still more data to understand what our employees want to do in regards to their development. What do they need from an organizational perspective, but also what are they interested in? And so this will hopefully, if we're able to listen to them and put something together that meets their needs and wants, we hope that that data and what it tells us will really help motivate them to participate in the OCHIN Learning Institute. This is also something that we're going to be we're piloting internally with our folks, but also we'll be rolling out to our members so that eventually in 2016 we'll be able to extend the offer to them to participate in the OCHIN Learning Institute as well. So last click here. So this is really just looking at some of the satisfaction data that we look at over time, and hoping that everything that I've just described as we tie it back to the data will help continue to move those numbers. So very last slide, our next steps. So the family of measures that Brad sort of showed on those 2 slides and that I've been talking to, what we don't have right now, we have a series of dashboards, but we don't have the OCHIN family of measures dashboard where all employees can go to understand what we're measuring and how we're doing. That's an area where we can improve, and I actually think that will have a lot to do with motivating staff. The more that data is accessible, I think Akira used the word transparency, the more that they can see and understand, the more that they can know how what they're doing is impacting the data. And then we're also going to be exploring using principles of visual management to display data throughout the organization, the physical organization, how do we post it on the wall, how do we continue to talk about it in ways, not just at our regular huddles and all staff, but in different ways as well. And then hopefully everything that we're doing will continue to use data to drive, inspire, and measure change. So that's the end of our few stories here, but we want to offer up the opportunity to ask any questions if there's time, Akira. I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah, so if it's okay, I'll just kind of summarize some best practices, and then I think we'll just open up for group discussion and Q&A then, if that's okay.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you for the stories. I think I particularly, well, 1, like that we have our data partners on the line, and 2, I think it was really great that you guys highlighted that data does not have to be numbers and charts and graphs. So kind of that qualitative data is also important to share. For example, document that you had that communicated the linkages between systems and processes, I think could be very valuable. So thank you for bringing that up. So like I said, I just want to quickly summarize some best practices and themes that you've kind of heard in today's presentation about how to increase and sustain motivation. So first, kind of like Sarah mentioned, is involving everybody and getting everybody in the room who is impacted by the process or who has direct involvement in the specific measure, just to make sure that they're interacting with the changes and any improvements. You want to make sure leadership is engaged so they can either help with messaging or just provide support for the work that you're doing. Some kind of public or maybe not public, but some kind of recognition is always helpful. So in a blog that you'll see on the references slide, there's something that I like called the Quality Counts newsletter. And that was just a good way for one particular organization to highlight the work that people have done and shown the data and improvements that they've been working on and share it with the larger organization. You want to make sure that it's fun. So another thing I saw on that same blog was a Data Diva Award. And I just thought that was kind of cool because if you see someone on the team that's really utilizing the data and really engaged in the process, then kind of recognizing that and giving them some sort of, you know, card or some kind of just recognition that you notice their work. And again, you know, like someone had mentioned, it's not necessarily about monetary incentives, but just some sort of way that people know that their work is being recognized and that they're connected to the process. You want to create a culture of success, not perfectionism. So in other words, you want to help people improve to the best of their abilities, and expecting perfection will likely do the opposite of motivate them and will likely reduce their self-efficacy. You want to measure improvement, team improvement, not individuals. So you want to value the team performance as a cohesive group. You know, measuring team outcomes reduces individual fear of failure or creates less competition among team members. So you want to look at team performance outcomes as a whole. And again, you want to choose data that aligns with organizational priorities. And you want to provide actionable, easy to understand data so everyone is on the same page. So I will go ahead and move on. We don't have a whole lot of time, but this is the group discussion that we had planned. So feel free to either address this question about what practices or systems you put in place to increase and sustain employee motivation in your clinic. Do they work, and why or why not? Or feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Does anyone have any kind of systems in place? And I'm looking over some of the comments that people posted throughout the presentation, and it seems like what has really motivated people are the metrics, seeing excitement and eagerness, passion, having passion with what you do.
Hey, Kara.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Ken over at Mosaic, and one thing we've done that seems to have some good impact is, you know, we have our weekly team huddles, and as part of that, they do PDSAs. They're constantly doing PDSAs, and so we present data to the teams every week that reflects different practices of the previous week, and so it's very actionable and relevant to the team. And then we also provide the sort of the detail behind those rates, and it just seems like providing that information in a really timely way for the patients that they saw the previous week, it seems to really have much more of an impact than sometimes these kind of bigger statistics that seems to get people engaged and motivated.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and I think the timeliness is a pretty important aspect. You know, if you're presenting data to a team that's a year old, it's not going to be as meaningful as if it was something that they just experienced. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and it's kind of neat because then they can actually look at the numbers and look at the patient lists, maybe people who fell through the cracks or something on a particular quality measure, and they can actually remember that patient. So it does seem to really kind of keep them really engaged.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it sounds like the huddles from Sarah and Brad's and your examples, sounds like the huddles are really effective as well.
Yeah, I think if they're done well, where they're non-hierarchical and everybody's input is valued, yeah, it does seem like those. I've never heard of huddles not working well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great. Is there any other quick comments or questions people want to share? Great. Well, so thanks everybody for attending the call, and thanks so much to Brad and Sarah for coming on and sharing their experience. I'll be following up with you all with a survey of today's call. So feel free, please take a few moments and complete that so we can keep these calls valuable to you. And let us know if you have any questions. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Akira. Bye.
Yep, bye.
Thanks, Akira.